Thank you, Chairman, Co-Chairman, dear colleagues. First slide, please. At our last meeting in Barcelona, we presented a new concept in islet research, the use of UW solution as the islet isolation solution. And we presented preliminary data demonstrating that using UW almost complete purity can be obtained. We now present our final data on UW versus physiological salt solutions for islet isolation, which not only demonstrate complete purity and an increased islet yield, but also explain what's so special about UW. Next slide. As to our methods, we used collagenase and hanks for islet isolation from 35 canine pancreatic segments. After intraductal infusion of collagenase and digestion, the solution was decanted and next on ice, either RPMI or UW into other groups was added, ducts and vessels were discarded, tissue was dispersed by stirring and syringing, and next after sieving, the tissue was concentrated by spinning and islets were purified following RPMI in 8 and UW in 9 cases by dextran-Hanks gradients, or following UW by Percoll gradients in UW solution. To assess islet yield and purity, samples were taken from the pancreas, the digest and the final suspension. Next slide. The islet content of the pancreas was determined by point counting on HE stained sections. And during isolation, islet yield was determined from the mean diameter of Dittison stained islets. And purity, quantitatively from amylase recovery and qualitatively by microscopy during counting and by reflection contrast microscopy of sections after immunogold labeling of insulin. Next slide. This is what the canine pancreas looks like using this technique. Insulin granules are stained with gold, and this is the natural reflection of iris and acinar tissue. The next slide shows the results before purification. Islet yield did not differ after using either UW solution or RPMI and amounted to 50% of the islet content of the pancreas. The next slide summarizes the results after purification. It shows islet yield and purity after RPMI as the isolation solution and dextran-Hanks gradients or UW and dextran-Hanks gradients or UW and Percoll UW gradients. Islet yield, the light bars, is expressed as a percentage of the islet content of the digest, that's prior to purification. And purity, the dark bars, is expressed as the islet volume percentage of the final tissue. After the use of UW, as the isolation solution, both yield and purity increased significantly. Using Percoll gradients, islet yield increased from 40 to 70% and islet purity from 30 to almost 100%. Next slide, please. The next slide illustrates our results using RPMI as the isolation solution. Islets are stained red with Dittison and are contaminated with acinar tissue. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates our results using UW and Percoll UW gradients. No acinar tissue is seen, these are all islets. Next slide, please. This is reflection contrast microscopy of the same preparation. Insulin is stained with gold. Acinar tissue is absent. Next slide, please. The next two slides, this and the next one, illustrate the UW Percoll UW technique for human islet isolation. These are human islets. And again, highly purified preparations were obtained. Next slide, please. Although in contrast to dog isolation, no complete purity was attained. This is acinar tissue. How do we explain these results? Next slide, please. Let's have a look at the dextran gradients. Tissue is mixed with this heavy layer, and after spinning, islets are recovered from these two top layers and aspirated. Next slide, please. This shows that following RPMI as the isolation solution, almost all purified islets, 90%, are found at this top layer, contaminated with acinar tissue. Whereas following the use of UW as the isolation solution, most of the islets are found at the denser upper middle layer, between 0.075 and 0.085 density. These results demonstrate that UW differs from RPMI in affecting islet and acinar density.
by preventing the uptake of water by these cells. Since these hyperosmolar gradients are also expected to affect density by dehydrating the tissue, the effect of UW is further explained by our results with Percoll gradients. Next slide, please. Using Percoll gradients, islets are recovered at a density lower than 0.075 over here. It was not unexpected, knowing that Percoll does not increase the physiological osmolarity of the UW solution. Nevertheless, acinar tissue was completely absent. Next slide. This slide shows the other properties of Percoll. It's an aqueous solution of plastic-coated silica particles, non-toxic, sterile. It's impermeant. That is, it does not cross the cell membrane like most components of the UW solution, and has a low viscosity. Next slide, please. Thus, we conclude that the impermeant nature of UW is both necessary and sufficient for complete purification of acinar tissue. It increases islet yield. However, Percoll may be not the final answer for allotransplantation because, and this I didn't show, it's often more contaminated with ducts and vessels as compared to dextran, Percoll, or starch UW gradients. These gradients we have recently tested. Using this high viscosity gradient, lower yields and the complete absence of ducts and vessels was demonstrated. And we think that viscosity may be important for further purification. Thank you.
Thank you. Is papers open for discussion, questions? Yes, please. Dr. Heron.
Michel, I enjoyed your paper very much, but I would like to ask you, what is the outcome if you purify 10 consecutive human islet suspensions with your gradient? What is the recovery, what is the purity, and
We've only done it once. We've done 6 to 7 isolations using the UW solution with good results, I think over 70% purity, but actually we don't have any experience with human islet isolation. We just used the DOC method and hoped for good results with UW. That is what we got. However, we used dextran gradients. We used industrial dextran, and I presented a poster in Lyon demonstrating that industrial grade dextran, some batches may give poor results, and that's what we got with human islet isolation. However, good purity, and the purity I just showed you was using these Percoll gradients.
Some years ago, the paper has been presented demonstrating that some cells are able to incorporate the Percoll particles. Did you check whether islet endocrine cells do incorporate these particles as well?
No. Interesting.
Yes, all right.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is we tried to increase the viscosity of Percoll density gradients in copolymerizing the Percoll molecule, and the increased viscosity did not improve the islet yield. My question is, when we looked into the pellets of Percoll isolations and in Patrick Songchong's PIP solution pellets, we found a lot of healthy, nice-looking islets. Have you ever checked your pellets?
Yes, I'm checking all the gradients. I showed you a simplified version of the Percoll I've been using for several of the last isolations. Actually, we started with more gradients, and we're inspecting every gradient. The problem with islets in the pellet is, in my experience too, is found with hyperosmolar gradients. We find the same in with dextran gradients, and the problem is far more bigger with the starch UW gradients we tested, where we have to add a lot of starch to get the right density.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh.
I have a question. The Leicester group have used UW in the digestion process and found that was very bad for viability, or appeared to be. And it is true, isn't it, that UW solution is not made for digestion at 37 degrees centigrade?
it's not designed for 37
absolutely.
degrees, and DuPont told me that they thought it was wise not to use it at this temperature, and we can think it's not wise to use it at this temperature because it's depleted of oxygen, it's saturated with nitrogen, and there are other things like, I won't go into the details, I'll tell you my data. We started using UW for collagenase when we just wanted to test UW and didn't think about the consequences. So we started with collagenase in UW, and I recently analyzed our data just for this, to update my presentation, and I didn't test it statistically. The figures were, the islet yield in the digest was about 10% lower, so not much, and I didn't test it really. So there's no big difference, but still it may be detrimental.
That's an important point for people who are doing this technique.
Well, now the last point you made yourself is to what you said was, I'm not sure that this is the way to use for clinical application because it separates not very well islets from ducts and vessels.
Yes.
What's your proposal to attack that problem?
Well, like I said, I think don't know whether I'm right, that viscosity is important, and these Percoll gradients are watery. So I'm very interested in what Sun Xiong was started, and I'm not able to do it now because I'm not practically working at this moment. But he was working on what I tracked out to be probably nicodens. And he told at a meeting in San Francisco that with his gradient, but he didn't explain the details of his gradient, and now last thing I heard, he's quit the islet business. He was able to change both density and viscosity.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we go to the next presentation, which comes from